Welcome, good afternoon, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. You look absolutely amazing on this wonderful Finance and Gender Day. Welcome. And speaking of finance, we're talking about the economics of water. This Global Commission on the Economics of Water, fantastic and brilliant commission. If you're looking for a report, we have a copy of the Turning the Tide report here right after this event. You can get a copy for yourselves or you can download it. Here's what's exciting. How do we keep the critical role of water within the 1.5 agenda? I am the Secretary General of the Convention on Wetlands, a treaty that is focused around water systems that are dependent on water from ridge to reef. It's fantastic to see all these incredible panelists, and also as we're at this 28th session of the Conference of the Parties for Climate Change, that this blue thread is finally on the agenda. And congratulations to the COP28 presidency, because this topic, and also for the first time, the issue of food, since we've all had lunch, and somehow in our homes we think we can just buy food, but we don't realize the cost of the water to grow that food. And so, without further ado, I just want to say we have an amazing panel here. And we also have the co-chairs of this commission who are supposed to be here, but of course, caught up between esplanades and the heat and other meetings, they're on their way. So I will start really to just kick off the conversation by really listening in from the countries and understanding how are things happening on the ground. So we're very deeply honored to have excellencies ministers and also experts in their own right who are just going to tell us in many ways, but one, and you have really 4 minutes to deliver this message on what you're doing. I'm really, really excited here because part of this conversation is to understand with the COP presidency, Your Excellency, Minister Rim Al-Shimi, you're the Minister of State. Perhaps I can sit, but I think we're missing one chair because I know that Her Excellency Okonjo-Iweala is on her way. I'll move to the handheld mic. Welcome. This works. Is this working? Okay. Oh, it works. Perfect. Thank you so much for the technical team. You are the Minister of International Cooperation, and here we are in the desert, which is a really beautiful place. We would like to know how you mobilize this patient long-term financing to make sure that you support the transition towards this 1.5 degree element around water.
I love the drama that you bring into the conversation, and I think it is a dramatic state of affairs today when we are celebrating the fact that water is part of the COP process. It's almost unthinkable that it never was. And one can, you know what they say about common sense, it's not so common. And we cannot underscore how absolutely pivotal it is for us to look at water as a key component of everything that we need to do as we address the climate challenges, but also as we address overall livelihoods. Now, you mentioned something interesting. You mentioned at the heart of the desert, and I want to just dwell on that for a second. We don't have a single river here. And not just in my country, but in the entire Arabian Peninsula. We don't have flowing rivers. We barely have predictable rainfall, which means water is something that we not only constantly need for life, but also what will be our greatest shortage and weakness. And if I could welcome Dr. Ngozi as well to the panel. It's lovely to be able to share this conversation with the esteemed guests that are here too. The United Arab Emirates, day before yesterday, announced as part of its COP28 presidency, $150 million dedicated to focusing on innovative scale-ups for water in countries that don't have access to it. And what that means is that this nation, and through this COP presidency, is focused on capitalizing on technological innovation to try to find ways in which we can bring ingenuity, but also scalability to the table. Now, I understand in many conversations with water experts that it isn't only about technology, that there is an entire both science and economics around it. We are new to this as a nation, but we are keen to learn and grow from it and with it. And this is why we wanted it to be part of our overall process. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Your Excellency. And welcome to Dr. Okonjo-Iweala, who's the Director General of WTO. And you're the co-chair of, this Global Commission on Water, the Economics of Water. Fantastic. And I know you're very busy and you'll be dashing off to another meeting. Tell us, for the first time in the history of the climate COP, the conversation around trade, production of food, without us not compounding the complexity of water, is on the table. Are you happy about this?
Well, first of all, thank you all and apologies. And you all know how these things are. Today is Trade Day. And downstairs, the first ever Trade Day, as our moderator just said. And downstairs, we've got a lot of panels with presidents of development banks going on, in which I'm involved. But I'm also co-chair of the Water Commission. So not knowing how to divide myself, I decided if I could join you all just to say a few words and cheer on my colleagues, Hank, and then I have to dash off. So yes, we're extremely happy. We have a coincidence of trade and water happening today. And many people do not know, but that 1 in 5 calories consumed in the world is traded. And there's a lot of water embedded in trade. And the issue of water in climate has been one that hasn't been brought together. I'm sure you said that already. And then you think about it. So you need to bring trade, water, and climate together, because we are seeing patterns that are engendered by climate change that have an impact on water, and water has an impact on climate and vice versa. So you look at agriculture, for instance. We are seeing changes in patterns of production. Places that are at our work in the WTO and through the Water Commission as well, places that used to be bread baskets may no longer be. And those that used to have droughts may see themselves having water. How can we equilibrate this difference in water in the world? The only way is through trade. If the UAE, as Minister Rim used to say, is one that doesn't have water, and they suddenly start seeing rain like they saw some days ago, and it becomes more frequent, that means something. They might be able to produce things they didn't used to produce. And others that used to have that advantage will not. And then it's trade that's going to get one from one place to the other. But the point I want to make is this, that we've taken water for granted, just the same way we take trade for granted. And if we don't change the way that we view this, and if we don't value water the way it should be valued, we risk seeing scarcity in one place, abundance in another, in a way that would be very detrimental to poor people, actually. So when we talk about putting in the right incentives for water use, people immediately feel nervous because they think, oh, this is pricing water, this is not equitable, this will be against poor people. Actually, from an economics and equity point of view, it makes a lot of sense to value water in the appropriate way. And I'm sure that my co-chair, Mariana Mazzucato, who is here, will also have more to say on that. That's why we're the Global Commission on the Economics of Water, because the issue is, how do you incentivize better use? How do you value water in a way that will assure both access and equity, so that poor people who end up paying the most for access to water when there is none will not be cheated in the process? And lastly, how do you get proper financing? You know, we need to get financing to repair infrastructure, prevent the water leakages that are there. And I'll end on this note. There's something that I've been saying throughout this conference, throughout this COP28. We have subsidies in the water sector, in agriculture, that actually don't deliver what they're supposed to, and they're environmentally damaging and detrimental. So why is the world spending money doing the wrong things when when we're here scratching around for climate finance? I think we have over $200 billion yes, worth of subsidies in water that are not incentivizing the right thing. Over 600 billion in agriculture that are trade distorting, 1.2 trillion of fossil fuel subsidies, 22 billion in fishery subsidies that lead to illegal fishing. If you total all this, we are talking about 1.7, 1.8 trillion. Why are we doing that? When we want to incentivize a green transition, when we want to use water properly. So let's really look at repurposing bad subsidies into good subsidies. I have nothing against subsidies, they just have to be the right ones. And then we can invest in water. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Fantastic point. And in fact, in the words of the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, how do we stop this madness? We really have to and really rethink. I want to invite Mariana to just come and join the panel if you may. I shall relieve this chair for you. Thank you. Mariana is also the co-chair, and if you can give us just a few words as the co-chair of the Global Commission on the Economics of Water. Over to you, please.
Sure. Sorry about that. We got lost in this very big parking lot. So hello, everyone. So this morning, we also had a panel where I feel like, as Ngozi just said, there's a cross-cutting theme across all these sessions. And one way that I would put it is that if we continue just to look at gaps, so there's a financing gap for the SDGs of about 7 trillion. The climate ones are something like 4.3 trillion. These numbers come out. There's always lots of zeros. With water, specifically with SDG 6 on WASH, it's 120 billion a year that isn't there. But that's part of the problem. We're looking at like holes to fill. So by definition, we start thinking of the quantity of finance, which is of course a problem. Those gaps do exist. But the economics, the new economics that we've been thinking about in the Commission is about how do we actually stop thinking of it as a market failure to fix, which by design, not by coincidence, leads to patchy, incoherent, unaligned policies, towards market shaping. What if we put the water challenges, but also all the SDG challenges, but here we're focusing on water, at the center, not at the periphery of how we design an economy, at the center of an industrial strategy, for example, at the center of innovation policy, at the center of outcomes-oriented finance. I wrote a book called Mission Economy that basically argued we would have never, ever gone to the moon 52 years ago with how we do policy today, with one side de-risking the other, as opposed to embracing the underlying uncertainty, right? Risk and uncertainty are different, with all the different sectors that needed to work together, from aerospace, electronics, materials, software. All the water challenges we have require a cross-sectoral approach. And from the government side, it can't be like in the Department of the Environment and or Water. It really also has to be cross-sectoral, because the water challenges we have, if you think about it, go across all the Sustainable Development Goals, right? Poverty, hunger, SDG 6, SDG 14, life below water. But also, one of our commissioners, Yvonne Sawyer, the mayor of Freetown, has told us that many of the violence against women, there you are, hello. This is what happens when you come late. You're like, oh my God, hi. Hi, Yvonne. That some of the violence against women, lots of the violence against women in Sierra Leone happens when you go fetch water, right? So looking at water systemically, literally across all the SDGs, looking at it as a collective problem, interdepartmental, intersectoral, looking at it not as a market failure and a financing gap to put a bit of money there and then pray to God and hope for the best, but actively shape the financial system. I just wrote a paper for the UN that looked at how much money, for example, is in our MDBs, the multilateral development banks, and the NDBs, the national development banks. There's over 22.5 trillion in just the national development banks, close to 3 trillion in the MDBs, but they're not outcomes oriented, right? They give money here and there, as you said, also government policy subsidies, but it's not focused on solving problems. And so what we try to do in the Commission is to think, what would an underlying new economics of water look like that's about shaping the market, that is about actually measuring whether the partnerships, the just water partnerships, what does it mean to have a just partnership and not a parasitic partnership, I can tell you we have a very parasitic water partnership in the UK where Thames Water has just been giving a lot of money out to their shareholders and not investing in the water infrastructure. So these issues also of corporate governance, moving away from shareholder value towards stakeholder value. These are all issues that are really relevant to our water problems today.
No, thank you so much, Mariana. I want to move very quickly to Her Excellency, the Minister from Ghana, Ms. Frida Prempeh, who is the Minister of Water and Sanitation. We want to hear from you. You're within this multilateral space. How do you see the water agenda in this multilateral space in the lens of your country?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. This is the first time my ministry is participating in COP28. And I want to take it up from where Auntie Gozi left off. It's important for us to place premium on water. Water service delivery is very, very important. Without water, you cannot have energy, you cannot do agriculture, you cannot do so many things. But it looks like we don't really talk much about water. But water and sanitation is very, very key in the critical development of any organization. So we are happy to be here. I want to say that the wash sector is very, very important. Talking about water, sanitation, and hygiene, you cannot delete one from each other. Looking at the rainfall patterns now, the climate change has affected everything. It's even affected us in terms of gender, because economically it's affecting women as well, women and children. And it's most of the time it's the women and children who fetch water all the time. I want to take it from the policy point of view. That how do we align our programs and policies with that of the international world? How do we align them to conform with the standards and best practices around the country? As an African country, as an emerging country, we, as a developing country, we basically have the same challenges when it comes to water management, water delivery, water services, and all that. Looking at our mining situation back home in Ghana, the illegal mining affecting our water bodies all the time, how do we align our policies and programs with that of the international world to learn from them? And looking at that, how do we even share our information? So information sharing is equally very important when you want to talk about water delivery and water management across the globe and across Africa. What do I learn from Namibia? What do I learn from Kenya? What am I learning from Nigeria? How can we be on the same page and leverage on the most important things? Then we need to build our capacity. Capacity building is equally important. We are all here sharing information, but we are building our capacities as well. So when you want to align, you have to look at the policy alignment, you look at the information sharing, you look at capacity building, and how you can also manage conflict resolution when it comes to transboundary issues. Because we are bounded by other African countries that share the same water situation. So if you're able to deal with conflict management issues, it also helps us a lot. And transfer of technical knowledge. Because now we live in a global world, everything has become digital, so we need to identify where you can leverage on transfer of knowledge from other colleagues as well. And above all, you cannot manage water resources, you cannot manage water when you don't have funding. So funding is very, very key. Finding financial support from our donor partners, finding financial support from the World Bank, and finding financial support from wherever that we can find it from. And how do we find water issues? How do we manage water issues? Back home in Ghana, under my ministry, we have the Water Resources Commission. They are mandated to ensure that the water quality at their various basins are well, and that people do not contaminate our water bodies, because water security is equally very important. So funding in this area is very, very important, and I think that it's about time. I know a lot of donor funders, a lot of the World Bank are supporting African countries, supporting Ghana as a whole, but we need to engage further to see how best we can get enough funding to manage our water bodies, to manage our water resources, to ensure that we have quality of water passing through our farms. So I believe that funding is a key issue. Finding the resources available to manage is also very key. And I believe that if you're able to leverage on the policies and programs, and also leverage on best practices across the globe, we'll be making a headway in the area of water management and water resources. We have the Ghana Water under my ministry, we have the Water Resources Commission, and we have a community water and sanitation agency that deals with water at the rural level. But I think that engaging with my colleague ministers of states across Africa, I've come to realize that most of the time we turn our attention to the rural communities, that's against the peri-urban communities, where they also have some basic challenges. So as we address water issues, we should not be looking at the rural communities alone. We should be looking also at the peri-urban areas where they also have challenges. And I believe that if you put all this together, it will go a long way to manage our water resources back home. But the most important thing is advocacy, communication, educating people on the importance of water. I believe this morning we've all drank water. I believe this morning we've all maybe have visited the restroom. But when you talk about sanitation, when you talk about water, people don't really place that premium that they're supposed to place on water. And water, as it said, it's life. Water is essential. Without water, we cannot survive. So whatever we can do collectively as African countries, as developing countries, and globally, we should do to support water management at all levels, not only in the urban areas or the peri-urban areas or only in the rural areas, but across the globe. And wherever that you can support your people, try and support them. So funding is important, water resources management is important, and I believe information sharing and policy alignment is equally important. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Your Excellency. That's really important. We move to the other end of West Africa, actually in the Sahel, to Senegal. Dr. Mohamed Diatta, you are the Sherpa of President Macky Sall. Within the Sahel, you're also dealing with issues of transboundary water management, and as Madam Minister Prempeh has talked about, the issue of multilateralism. Thank you, Your Excellency. How do you see these relationships and really managing these elements around water and pricing of water?
Thank you, moderator. I would like to speak in French as a French-speaking country.
Merci.
Maybe Anna will make a synthesis of my intervention. Merci beaucoup. En tout cas, moi, je voulais tout simplement dire que l'économie de l'eau et le changement climatique sont des phénomènes qui impactent réellement le Sénégal. Et aujourd'hui, de plus en plus, le rapport de la Banque mondiale sur la sécurité de l'eau indique que les phénomènes extrêmes liés à l'eau, la sécheresse, mais également la pollution de l'eau, coûtent au PIB du Sénégal près de 10%. 10% du PIB du Sénégal. Donc, nous voyons qu'aujourd'hui, maîtriser le cycle de l'eau, maîtriser l'économie de l'eau dans sa globalité, l'eau en tant que ressource transversale est fondamentale pour asseoir un développement durable avec les différentes régions. Donc, nous devons repenser les modèles économiques et nos modèles politiques si nous voulons atteindre les objectifs fixés par la communauté internationale et placer l'Afrique sur les rampes de l'accès universel. Nous savons que le changement climatique impacte particulièrement l'Afrique, impacte le Sahel et a des incidences sur la paix, la stabilité et la sécurité globale. Donc nous devons de plus en plus travailler à mettre en place des mécanismes de financement innovants. Et c'est tout le sens du panel international de haut niveau que le président Macky Sall a lancé lors du 9e Forum mondial de l'eau, mais également en partenariat avec le Royaume du Pays-Bas, et beaucoup de partenaires internationaux. L'idée, c'est de mobiliser 30 milliards de dollars par an pour pouvoir placer l'Afrique sur les rampes de l'accès universel à l'eau à l'horizon 2030 et au-delà. Et donc, cela est essentiel. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, l'Afrique a un gap de plus de 20 milliards de dollars pour le financement de l'eau. Et donc, l'idée de ce panel, c'est de montrer qu'il y a des voies possibles pour lever ces moyens et développer des infrastructures, parce que l'Afrique n'a pas assez d'infrastructures bleues, assez d'infrastructures vertes pour supporter sa transition économique et supporter également sa résilience. En tout cas, mon dernier point va porter sur l'importance qu'on doit donner aujourd'hui à la coopération transfrontalière sur l'eau. Nous savons que l'Afrique est traversée par beaucoup de bassins. Ces bassins sont des noyaux pour développer la résilience africaine. Et il est important, à l'image de l'Organisation pour la mise en valeur du fleuve Sénégal, de l'Organisation pour la mise en valeur du fleuve Gambie, développer des nexus, interconnecter l'eau avec le monde économique, avec l'agriculture, avec l'élevage, mais développer également l'hydroélectricité. Aujourd'hui, dans le cas du Sénégal, l'OMVS permet à la Mauritanie d'avoir 100% d'accès à l'eau pour une ville comme Nouakchott. c'est 15% de l'électricité du Sénégal qui vient de l'hydroélectricité. C'est 20% de l'hydroélectricité pour le Mali. Mais c'est également 60% pour l'alimentation en eau de Dakar. Donc, travailler dans des mécanismes de coopération régionale à travers des bassins sont fondamentaux pour bâtir la paix, la résilience à l'échelle du Sahel, particulièrement dans la zone ouest africaine où de plus en plus le changement climatique impacte notre économie. Enfin, il est temps, pour conclure, que de plus en plus, nous donnons beaucoup plus de visibilité à l'eau dans les négociations climatiques. Et c'est le message que nous voulons lancer ici, à Dubaï, que l'eau doit intégrer les négociations climatiques parce qu'on ne peut pas parler de climat sans parler de l'eau. L'eau est le principal indicateur du climat. Je vous remercie de votre attention.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Diatta. A very valid point. And before I move to the three panelists, I want your thoughts, Mariana, because you're the co-chair. In listening to the two countries and the COP presidency, what are you thinking is sort of emerging as you see it from the governance perspective? In a minute. Yes, in the interest of time.
I think I'd love to say it in French, but my French is terrible, that what you've described is, again, putting it at the center, not at the periphery. It has to be at the center of the climate negotiations. It has to become an indicator. Think of the ESG indicators, which have been criticized recently because they're easy to fudge. Water is not easy to fudge. We could actually create very practical, measurable, legally accountable metrics about water as an indicator of how we're treating the climate. We just wrote an op-ed with Nick Stern, who was the head of the Climate Commission, Dasgupta, biodiversity, and ourselves with water, just showing there's such strong links between the three. We can't treat them not separately. And that's, again, why we need an economics that understands this systems and collective perspective. I'd have more to say, but my minute is up.
Fantastic, Marianne.
Madame, j'ai oublié une idée qui est essentielle.
Allez-y, monsieur.
Nous devons de plus en plus dépasser les approches programmes dans le domaine de l'eau. Nous devons penser à des blue compacts. Si nous voulons aujourd'hui mobiliser des financements importants, nous devons penser comment mettre en place des compacts sur l'eau qui touchent l'agriculture, l'élevage, qui touchent les transports sur l'eau, mais également qui touchent tous les segments de la vie où l'eau est fondamentale, y compris l'hydroélectricité. Ça, c'est un point essentiel que j'avais oublié dans mon message.
Thank you so much. The blue thread that cuts across all the different sectors. We go very neatly to the World Bank, and we have Dr. Suraj Kumar, who's the Global Director for the World Water, the water practice. You are an IFI, an international financing institution, and the World Bank has been working towards this global priority program on water for next year. So we want to hear a little bit about that and how this fits into the thread in what you just heard.
So first of all, I want to just say a word on, or a couple of words on role of water in 1.5 degrees Celsius world. There's a lot more awareness today that there will never be adaptation without addressing the core water resource management issues. That awareness is missing in countries, many countries. In the conversation here, I find from COP26 to 27 to 28, it is taking us a lot of time for people to understand why water is so central to adaptation. If 700 million people, more than half of them women, do not have access to basic drinking water, what adaptation are we talking about? My second point linked to this is the mitigation story. Water is not just about adaptation. The irrigation services, the way crop is cultivated, the irrigation practices practiced by countries particularly in Southeast Asia, South Asia, is responsible for more than 10% of total global methane. Sanitation practices, unsafe sanitation practices produce a very big part of the global methane. So we also need to address what I would call irrigation practices and the sanitation practices if you really want to be connected with the 1.5 degree world. There's a lot more awareness. Global Commission's work has helped. We are coming up with a couple of reports with others. One is on the sanitation in times of climate change, which is to really provide an economic analysis of why countries need to invest in safe sanitation because of the emission linkages. And similarly on irrigation, Our president announced a big program on methane because we have maximum methane coming from irrigation, the way water is practiced. And my second and final point is the solution side. Anyone who's listening to me now, if you have a water security problem, if you have an irrigation problem, if you have a sanitation problem, please get in touch with the World Bank team in the country office. Because the technical solutions are known, have been known for a very long time. I don't see governments prioritizing water sector. The minister's water, yes, but the minister's finance, no. The prime minister's not yet. That needs to change. And the change will come with the conversation we have by bringing all the stakeholders together at in a national platform, which many countries have. So I think, in my view, we as the multilateral development banks, and we have set up a platform on water with all the MDBs coming together, but I would like to call upon all the governments in the countries and civil society organizations, please work with us on water. I just met before coming here with the Lagos city, and they said, we have a serious flooding problem. I said, okay, please get me a request now with your governor. And I waited for him. I said, you get me the request while I'm here. He said, no, I will write it when I go back to Lagos. I said, no, get me a request, action, implementation. So we want to work with you to move into implementation, because our challenge is there's a lot of conversation and we are very slow in action. And and you've heard our president, we want to be the action World Bank. We want to get into the things and start helping countries to solve the problem. So please, our doors are open, and please let us know. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. The action is the word here. Less talk and more action. And I move very quickly to Ms. Kim Hue-Nyo, who is the Managing Director of the Center for Nature and Climate at the World Economic Forum. You heard there when Dr. Okonjo-Iweala talked about the incentives, the complexity of incentives and financing. Can you talk a little bit about how do we transition away so that we make sure from these perverse incentives and work around water security?
Yeah, first I would like to congratulate the UAE for their leadership in bringing water, food to the top of the agenda. I think without a very holistic approach at looking at climate change, not only will we not get to the Paris Agreement, right, we will also not be solving all the environmental issues that we are dealt with, having to deal with today, right? We are crossing planetary boundaries. It's a triple planetary crisis: climate, biodiversity, as well as pollution issues. And water, too much, too little, too polluted, too dirty. Right now, we are facing it head on. Extreme weather events is costing us 1 billion every 2 weeks, right? And it's going to just get worse. Many of these are water-related disasters. I wanted to talk about the need for systems change. Right, I think the speakers all alluded to it, the need for policy, the need for markets, for finance, for technology, as well as for culture to shift in order to really, for us to pivot from business as usual, right? And the way we think about systems change is really to think about where are the acupuncture points, right? Because if you don't get to the acupuncture points, it's very difficult to get the whole system to transform. Right, and I'll just give two examples of what the World Economic Forum is trying to do to support these efforts. The first is actually, we started the Aquapreneur initiative, right, to get innovations, to identify challenges, to get innovators to submit the solutions, to reward them, to celebrate them. But what you would hear from innovators, I'm sure many of you are in contact with them, is that it's actually not the lack of technology or solutions out there, right, but the lack of ability for them to scale. Whether because the policies are not in place, or whether because corporates are still too afraid to pilot these ideas within their frameworks. So where the forum is leaning in to help is providing that platform to link innovators into a broader ecosystem of actors so that we can scale as well as accelerate the efforts a lot faster. The second area that we also piloted, have started working on, is what I'll call Gaia initiative, which is giving to amplify action, right? It is to how do we actually plug philanthropy into the public-private conversations, right? And interestingly, some of the studies have reflected that only 2% of global giving goes to climate and nature, which is surprising, right? But maybe not so, because a lot of philanthropy are actually more interested in giving to local community efforts. But increasingly, when you find that the climate is actually connected to local livelihoods, to jobs, to quality of life, right? Then it makes a lot of sense for the philanthropists who are already giving to integrate climate and nature into their giving efforts, to mobilize, obviously, more giving, right? Because if you don't mobilize that resources over the next decade, we are going to be paying a much bigger price for the next 10, right? So mobilizing that philanthropic dollar, mobilizing that philanthropic community to think about integrating that into their giving efforts, to think about giving more, but also to think about, as they give, can they actually be part of that acupuncture effort, right? Don't just give in your own ways because you're passionate about certain areas, but think about what are the areas to give so that it can be combined with the work of the World Bank, it can be combined with the efforts of the government, combined with the efforts of corporate. And then together, I think we can do a lot better to drive the impact and efforts. Thank you.
Fantastic. Giving right, not just giving for the sake of giving. That's fantastic. I like the Gaia initiative because we now segue very well to Ms. Wendy Broadgate. Of course, not the last, but not even the least either. But our last speaker here is the Executive Director of the Earth Commission for Future Earth. Planetary boundaries. We've just faced the hottest year this year. And your thoughts on how do we rethink the science around exactly what you've listened and you've heard here, in your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's really great to be part of the conversation here. And it's lovely to have the Earth Commission in dialogue with the Global Economics Commission on Water, because we're very complementary, and I think there's lots of roles for synergies between us. So what is the Earth Commission? It's an independent scientific assessment of the stability and resilience of the planet to assess what are the limits of this holistic system, and how do we define where those boundaries are that we shouldn't cross to maintain that resilience. We've also incorporated justice into this, and we've defined Earth system safe and just boundaries. And those boundaries build on all of the scientific literature that is out there in an assessment format. And the assessment is designed to underpin action within the Global Commons Alliance, ultimately to arm businesses, cities, nations, and citizens with targets to stay within these Earth system boundaries. And what we found out is that we have actually transgressed all of these boundaries, and several of these boundaries relate to water. We have a boundary for freshwater surface flows, a boundary for groundwater, nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, that are largely within rivers, and biosphere boundaries, which also are fully dependent on water. So the holistic nature of water within these is very important. And I think the dialogue between the Earth Commission and the Global Economic Commission on Water is just beginning. And I think we have a lot of scope for collaboration.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And you really just finished on a very fantastic note. And I would just want to hand over the baton back to Mariana, and who will be closing this. You've listened to all of these speakers, that very blue thread that goes through all of our lives and this planet. And as the title says, the critical role of water in keeping 1.5 degrees. And as the co-chair, your thoughts, please.
Sure. Maybe I'll also try to be a bit provocative, not for the sake of being provocative, but due to deep, how do you say, prejudice. With philanthropy. Just something on philanthropy. Philanthropy makes sense if the companies, for example, let's just think of a random one, Amazon, that then sets up the Bezos Earth Fund, is a good company that is really at the center of how it treats workers, how it does capitalism, is doing good. And then you can put some of the extra profits in a foundation. What we currently have is a lot of bad business models, if I could just be quick about that, which then put excess profits, what I would call rents. Adam Smith talked about the free market, not free from the state, but free from rent, into foundations, into charity. I think what we have been talking about here is how do we do capitalism differently? How do we do business differently? How do we do government differently? And if these companies are putting water at the center also of how they produce, how they distribute, and then if there's something left over, once they've also treated the workers well, paid their tax and so on, so be it. Wonderful to have this philanthropic money. But currently that's not the system. And I think, if we talk about scale, something that was also brought up, if you look at how a lot of companies have scaled globally, it's through kind of boring stuff like procurement. I'm a nerd about procurement. Every country, whether it's a small island state like Barbados or a large country like China or the US, often have 30 to 40% of their budgets on buying stuff. Imagine putting water targets at the center of everything government purchases. Sweden, for example, has school meals in Sweden have to be healthy, tasty, and sustainable, right? So school lunch, what's more normal than school lunch? Putting water targets at the center of school lunch, putting water targets at the center of how we manufacture, whether it's steel, cement, and so on. So I think it's also a discussion about normalizing. We were saying putting water at the center of how we think about finance, but literally how we think about capitalism. And I think an outcome of this discussion, and definitely the collaboration with the Earth Commission, should be really about going beyond the talk, walking the talk, but with concrete metrics that are at the core of how we structure the finance, how we structure our business models, how we structure government policy. And Ghazi was talking about repurposing subsidies. That's also about conditionality. We're all used to the problematic conditionalities of the past when finance came to countries conditional on reducing their deficits as though it was like a voodoo number, 3%, 0%, 10%, when actually the conditions should be making sure that whether it's a country or companies receiving the finance are reinvesting back into the economy in a sustainable way, again, with water targets at the center of that. That's why we have green steel in Germany. The KfW, the German bank, put as a condition to the steel sector that they had to reduce the material content of production in order to receive that loan. And that's why we have green steel, not because they went to the World Economic Forum, as much as I love the web. Anyway, right? So I think that issue that she brought up of repurposing, that's about a new social compact. So public, private, forming, what I said before, symbiotic, mutualistic ecosystems and partnerships driven by outcomes on specific problems. And in this case here, all the different water problems that, as we heard, go across the economy. It's not just water as a sector, it's water as an area that is everywhere and that we need to bring to the center, not the periphery. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. A round of applause for all the speakers, please.